Shalom and welcome to Shikul Da'at. I'm Rabbi Josh Rose. Here's a weird thought experiment. Imagine that your life was condensed into the length of a 2-hour movie. Based on average life expectancy in the U.S., each minute of the film is about 1.5 years. The first few seconds are a miracle. You're born and experience the first couple of months of life. Just past minute 1, you begin to learn to walk. You might want to fast forward a bit, starting at minute 8, because that's middle school. But more magnificent moments of growth and opening continue. You go to college around the 11th minute, etc. Halfway through the movie, though, things are getting a little more routine. You start to see some patterns. Maybe you're fast-forwarding now. You zip through. You wake up, pour your coffee, go to work, come back. Beautiful milestones along the way, to be sure. Children, and they go to college, maybe grandchildren. A lot of minutes go by now. Patterns, repetition. We're fast-forwarding. Along the way, there are vacations, amusements, but a lot of the same routine. You get some new pants. That was exciting. Then back to the routine. A lot of fast-forwarding now through the repetition. Now, if this were a movie you'd seen before or watched part of, you'd fast forward until the part you hadn't seen. You want to know, where is this plot heading? So now when we're talking about our lives, where exactly is the plot heading? Well, during this period of the Jewish calendar, called Sfirat omer, we are encouraged to do exactly that, to ask, where is this plot heading? Our Torah portion says, Deber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta elem, ki tavo'u el ha'aretz asher ani noten lachem, u'ketzartem et ketzira v'havietem et omer rishit ketzirchem el hakohen. Speak to the Israelite people, God says to Moses, and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first omer of your harvest to the priest. Okay, so we bring a measure of grain to the sanctuary and we offer it. And then, Usfartem lechem mimacharat Shabbat miyom haviechem et omer tenufa sheva Shabbatot temimot hiena. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. This is the period of Sfirat omer. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then, says the Torah, you shall bring an offering of new grain to God. Okay, so at the end, we observe this festival, Shavuot. Now, over time, Shavuot was designated as the day on which we receive the Torah. And the Torah itself doesn't mention that. I just read the core of what's the Shavuot mitzvah. So I'm curious, is there something in the text itself that connects Shavuot to the receiving of the Torah? Now, eventually, this period of the counting of the Omer came to be seen as preparation for receiving the Torah, to make us ready. So graft this idea onto our weird movie thought experiment. Is there a way that counting can be seen as some kind of narrative arc in the plot? That is, if this period is, as the rabbis say, a preparation for the Torah, well, what does that mean for our lives? Well, let's go to the text. First, the word omer itself. An omer was a measure of grain, a sheaf of particular size equivalent to about 3 pounds. So far, so good. After the start of Pesach, we bring an omer and offer through the priests at the sanctuary. We offer it to God. As we've seen before in this podcast, it can be useful to look where certain words have appeared before. Midrash Tanchuma really piqued my curiosity this year by pointing something out I had never noticed before. The Midrash says, regarding this passage in the Torah, our Torah portion, the Holy One said to Israel, see what the difference is between you and me. You offer me 1 omer for the whole year, as it is stated in our Torah portion. But I have given each and every one of you an omer, as it is stated in the giving of the manna in the book of Exodus. Each person gets an omer. Furthermore, you only offered me 1 omer a year, while I give you manna every day. The Midrash notices that the only time the word omer has been used previously was in the Exodus immediately after God brings the Israelites out of Egypt. The Israelites acclaim God with the song of the sea after they come out of Egypt. They're elated and they sing God's praises. And then almost immediately they say, Mi ten mutenu v'yad Hashem b'eretz Mitzrayim, u'shivtenu al sira bas'ar ba'ochlenu lechem lisboa, ki hotzetam otanu el hamidbar hazeh lahamit et kol hakahal hazeh v'ra'av. If only we had died by the hand of God, they say, in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. And then God responds by saying to Moses, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them and see whether they will follow my instructions or not. That is Torah-ti, my Torah, my instructions. But on the sixth day, when they apportion what they have brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount they gather each day. Okay, so this is the beginning of the story of the manna. Now listen to the per-person measure that is used for the manna. זה דבר אשר ציווה השם לקטום ממנו איש לפי אוכלו. omer לגוגלת מספר נפשותיכם, איש לאשר באוהלו תיקחו. This is what God has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat. Now this is Moses speaking to them. An omer to a person for as many of you as there are. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent. Interesting, right? The only other place omer is mentioned before our Torah portion is right here after the Exodus. And notice that the manna is not only food for the complaining and newly free people. It is also a test. Let's hear that verse again. God said to Moses, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. And again, the word for instruction is Torah. Torah-ti. God says literally, my Torah. The manna is a kind of test of the Israelites' willingness to develop a relationship to God's Torah. It has two parts. One is to not gather more than they need each day, except on Friday when they're to gather twice as much because they have to observe the prohibition against gathering it on Shabbat. So we should think about that use of omer as we read this week's Torah portion, Emor. After all, it's the only other reference to omer that precedes this, as I've said. So let's pause and take a look, or listen rather, for the resonances between these two passages. So first, in the Exodus story, the omer of manna comes from heaven to earth. In our Parshat, the omer of grain goes from earth to heaven. That is, the Israelites grow it and offer it to God. Second, and I grant you this one's a bit more of a stretch, the manna comes around because the Israelites are craving food. And yet if they are to enjoy it, they have to restrain themselves from gathering more than they need, because if they keep some overnight, it spoils and turns all maggoty and gross. So they have to hold back. And in Parshat Emor, the Israelites are not allowed to eat the fruit of the earth until they've made the omer offering. Our Parsha actually specifies, until that very day, until you have brought the offering, that is the omer offering, to your God, you shall eat no bread or parched grain or fresh ears. It is a law for all time throughout the ages in all your settlements. Third, the manna comes after redemption, but before the culmination of revelation, that is in the Torah, the giving of the Torah. In our Parsha, the omer is to be offered at the end of the festival marking redemption, that is Passover, and at the beginning of the culmination of the entire Torah, which is when the Israelites enter the land of Israel to build a society that's based upon this Torah that they've received. Fourth, the manna has a special relationship to Shabbat. Though we usually think about the mitzvah of Shabbat as part of the Ten Commandments, and indeed on Shavuot the Torah reading is the Ten Commandments, it's actually in the section of the manna that the Israelites are first told to observe Shabbat in some way, specifically by not gathering their omer of manna on Shabbat. Meanwhile, in Parshat Emor, the omer offering initiates a counting of 7 weeks, that is, 7 Sabbaths, 7 Shabbatot. And at the end of that, we observe a kind of Shabbat, that is a festival, and that festival is Shavuot. And the Torah says, on that same day you shall hold a celebration. So here it's describing Shavuot. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall not work at your occupations. This is a law for all time in all your settlements. You shall not work at your occupations. Malechet avodah lo ta'asu. That is, we can't do malacha at the end of the 7th week. just like we can't do malacha, usually translated as labor, on the seventh day. Remember that we wondered at the outset if there was a way to see within the Torah itself a connection between Shavuot and the giving of the Torah. I wouldn't say we've answered it to our full satisfaction, but it does seem like there's something there. We found all of these parallels. Now let's zoom out a bit and think about how they relate. Coming out of Egypt, God gives everyone an omer of manna that sustains and tests the Israelites. And why must they be sustained after all? And what is the purpose of the test? So they can follow God's Torah. Remember, God says, I'm going to give them the manna, and I'm going to test if they can follow Torah-T, follow my instruction. And in our Parsha, as they prepare to fulfill the Torah by finally entering the land promised to them and to build a society based on that Torah, they have to bring an omer to God. So through the resonances between the manna story and our Parsha, there does seem to be some basis for connecting the agricultural festival of Shavuot with the receiving of the Torah. Now, as an aside, the traditional basis for celebrating Shavuot as the festival of receiving the Torah has actually nothing to do with this. Instead, it's based on careful reading of the dates given for the Exodus, way back in the book of Exodus, and a bit of word association. It's actually pretty fascinating, and if you're curious, you can find it in the Talmud Daf 86b and 87 of Shabbat. But we're trying a different approach, one based on the content of the Torah narratives themselves. So far, we have two stories. Our Parsha, Emor, this week's Torah portion, and the manna story. And these have a bunch of resonances and parallels. So it's interesting, but is there a deeper message about the connection between Omer and the giving of the Torah? I mean, those similarities are evocative, but where do they point us? And the counting that we do, what does that have to do with any of this? In other words, what are we supposed to take from the similarities that we see? Well, let's start answering that by looking at yet another connection, a fifth connection between Parshat Emor and the manna story, one that we didn't talk about before. It may seem too obvious to dwell on, but actually I think it's really important. And that is that with the manna, we received an omer. And what initiates the counting of the weeks is that we give an omer. And if you remember, the Midrash that I started with, Midrash Tanchuma, points out exactly that dynamic, the giving and the receiving. So hold that idea in mind. The Jewish mystical tradition really embraced the counting of the omer as a period of intense spiritual preparation for receiving the Torah once again on Shavuot. To take one of many examples, the author of the Katav HaKabbalah, Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, a 19th century rabbi, wrote about the counting that its purpose is to assist us in, quote, becoming sanctified and purified from all of the materialistic desires and lowly thoughts during this 7-week period. For even the word tispor, to count, does not connote merely to know how many days and weeks. Rather, it implies analysis and watchfulness. And here he demonstrates a parallel that's in the book of Job, where the word count is used in precisely this manner. If you're interested, it's in Job 14:16. Similarly, he goes on, here too, the meaning of you shall count for yourselves is that you should inspect your lives, think deeply about yourself. So let's go back to the thought experiment. You know, with your life like a movie, we began to count the minutes of the film and started to see a lot of repetition. Someone sitting eating popcorn to the movie of our life might wonder, where is this headed? Well, I'm quite sure that Mecklenburg never thought of that. He is getting to something about counting, about the counting being a movement towards something. Now, counting can highlight the repetitive nature of a thing. Another day, another dollar, as some people say, year in, year out. The passing of time in these cases points to the apparent emptiness of it all. And part of the human experience is our awareness of the absurdity of our lives when we feel caught in these cycles that don't lead anywhere. But Rabbi Mecklenburg is saying that Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, should lead us to see things in the opposite way, that we are counting each step on a beautiful progression towards preparation or towards purification. It's impossible to overstate the importance of this. we are rarely encouraged to really think about the ultimate direction of our lives. We're often encouraged to count our salaries, our achievements, the number of items checked off on our bucket list, the number of years left until retirement, the number of minutes left until my podcast is over. But think again about counting the minutes in that video, building a narrative that moves towards some larger purpose. Do we have the courage to think in this way? And what is that larger purpose? Here, I want to take a little bit of an unexpected turn by delving into the Kabbalah, that is, into Jewish mysticism. Sfirat omer was developed to new heights by the Kabbalists. They saw in this period of counting the possibility of a personal and national purification and rectification that was essential to being prepared to truly receive the Torah. And ultimately, they would say, to redeem the world. Now, bear with me on this detour. It seems disconnected, but actually I want to build on that fifth connection between our Parshat and the manna story. You know, the bit about the receiving of the manna and the giving of the omer. So bear with me for this little detour because it's actually quite important and beautiful. Rabbi Yehuda Rav Ashlag was an extraordinary Kabbalist of the 20th century. He writes about that which separates human beings from God. He says in one of his books, "The will to receive is an intrinsic part of every created being, as it is the entire created aspect of that created being. It is the cause, that is the will to receive, is the cause of the created being becoming completely separated from the Creator. For the Creator, that is God, is wholly giving and does not have the tiniest spark of receiving, whereas the created being is entirely receiving and does not have the tiniest spark of giving." What he's saying is that what makes us, us, is our desire to receive. Rabbi Ashlag doesn't present this as a value judgment. It's just the fact of any life. If we don't receive the gift of life or food or light or shelter or air, we don't exist. That's just the natural state of a physical being. God's nature, on the other hand, according to the Kabbalah in Ashlag's reading, is to give. God has been sustaining the universe with life and blessing it from the first moment of creation unceasingly. God's very essence is to bestow, and ours is to receive. In Ashlag's explanation of the Zohar, the fundamental feature of creation is that the Creator and created are separated in this way by our conflicting natures. But here's the thing. Though our essence as physical beings is our will to receive, our spiritual essence is the will to give. This is, in fact, according to Ashlag, what it means to be created in the divine image. There's a part of us which all of us have tapped into and which actually gives us the deepest joy, which is the part of us that wants to give, that wants to bestow upon others. That's the part of us that connects us to God. The purpose of a life of Torah is to learn to emulate the Creator in this way, in Ashlag's reading of the Zohar. That is, to develop our spiritual nature as givers so that it overcomes our physical nature as receivers, so that we learn to make the very essence of our lives about giving our focus, our interest, our love, our care to those around us, giving to our Creator with our desire to heal the world. And not just around the margins, but the very essence of ourselves, to let giving become the primary nature of who we are. As soon as we experienced redemption, we found that freedom was not enough. We said more, more, more. We needed water. We needed food. We complained. We wanted more. God gave us the manna. And this would lead eventually to the giving of the Torah. And in this week's Torah portion, God gives us the chance to actualize our spiritual growth by giving back the omer, so to speak, to realize our spiritual potential by becoming givers. The counting of the omer offers us a chance to reimagine the movie of our life by shaping a narrative, one in which we go from being a person who receives to being a person who gives. It's the greatest plot twist of all time. Shavuot is known as Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of our Torah. It's interesting that we don't refer to it as Kabbalat Toratenu, the receiving of the Torah, but rather we use a name which emphasizes the gift that we were given. Think about it as though the matan, the giving, is the ultimate secret of Toratenu, of Torah. That the Torah can teach us how to turn the story of our lives into one of giving as we draw on the infinite well within us to share our deepest desire, which is in fact to give of ourselves and from ourselves. It's here that we find our deepest purpose, and here that we learn to make each day truly count. Have a good week. Thank you so much for listening.